In this lecture, we're going to continue our examination of different types of research studies, and we now shift to the second major type of research study, which is referred to as exploratory research. And in these investigations, the studies are designed to take the next step from just simply describing the characteristics of a particular population. So what is done here is actually examining those descriptive characteristics and how those descriptive characteristics start to interact with various behaviors. One such study type falls under the classification of epidemiology, which is the study of examining associations between various lifestyle factors and predicting the risk for certain conditions or disease. And in this example study published in 2017, this particular study sought to examine how leisure activities were linked to mental health benefits by examining the effects given a number of different factors, employed, unemployed, and homemakers. And studies such as this usually involves very large sample sizes. Such studies are often described as cohort studies as well. And a cohort study is one that typically follows a group of people over time. And these are individuals that initially do not have any particular condition. And so these are healthy individuals. And the objective of this type of study, by following it over time, is to examine if a particular group of healthy individuals develop a unique condition. And so in this respect, the exposure to possible risk factors for developing that condition is examined. These are rather difficult studies to carry out because these are long-term in nature and requires repeated follow-up of the research participants enrolled in the study. Extending the cohort study is what's called the case control study. And in this situation, the study is designed to examine groups of individuals that have a particular condition that the researchers are aiming to investigate. And so in this situation, there are what are referred to as cases, and there's also a control condition. So the cases refer to the group of individuals, the group of research participants that have an existing condition or disease. And in a study such as this, individuals that do not have that particular condition are enrolled into the study as the control group. And so the overall objective of a study such as this is to examine past exposures to possible risk factors for the condition. And oftentimes studies such as this are carried out over time as well, that would require follow-up with the individuals enrolled in the research study, as it is with the cohort study. Another type of exploratory research that is very common is what's referred to as correlational predictive research. And in this type of approach, relationships between variables are examined. It's very important to note that with correlational predictive type of research, we are not establishing cause and effect. We are just examining the coincidental occurrence of two different or more variables at the same time. A simple correlation refers to the examination of only two variables at the same time. The regression analysis is a further step from a simple correlation, in that where the simple correlation just examines the presence of a statistical relationship between two variables, the regression analysis will further extend that into examining the predictive power of one variable, we'll call variable x, for a second variable we'll call variable y. And this is examined through a numerical equation. And so y equals mx plus b is the equation of a straight line, where m refers to the slope of the line and b is the y-intercept of the line. And this is the predictive equation if a relationship exists between two variables. The predictive variable is x and the outcome variable being y. And a regression analysis also generates a value for predictive error. So the prediction of x to y is not going to be perfect, but the regression analysis will provide a range of possible predictive values. Many regression analyses are single variable, and those are regression analyses where there is one and only one predictor variable in the relationship, as we see here with y equals mx plus b, x being the predictor variable. Other approaches apply what's referred to as multiple regression, and multiple regression involves a single outcome variable, as we have for y in the single variable case, but there are two or more predictor variables. So this equation would expand to include an x1, x2, x3, so on and so forth. This graph illustrates a relationship between two variables. And in this example here we're examining the effect of body mass, and so basically a person's weight on predicting a measure of muscle strength. So we would refer to the x-axis variable as the predictor variable. And the question we're asking here, is body mass a good predictor of 1 RM strength? And so along the y-axis, this is what is referred to as the criterion variable, often referred to as the dependent variable. This is the outcome of interest in a study such as this, which recruited 30 healthy adults that were measured for their body mass, so their weight was checked, and the amount of weight that they could lift was also obtained from each of these 30 research participants. And what we see here are what we refer to as the raw data, plotted on a scatter plot, and what we see is a general upward trend. So individuals with a greater body mass are likely to have a higher level of muscle strength. This is not to imply that body mass causes a higher level of muscle strength, but a correlational study tells us that there is a relationship between these two variables. So in conducting a correlational study, there are some key points to remember. The first point is to identify the dependent variable. This is the variable we're trying to predict. This is the one that always gets plotted along the y-axis, and we call it the criterion variable. We then identify what is often referred to as the independent variable along the x-axis, but with a correlational study, we refer to it specifically as the predictor variable. So oftentimes in a correlational study, the term independent variable and predictor variable are used interchangeably. Likewise, the term dependent variable, which is plotted along the y-axis, and criterion variable are also used interchangeably. In a study such as this, the first step would be to make a scatter plot of the data, as we saw on slide 36. And then the researcher is reminded to perform something called the intraocular test. Basically, the researcher should just essentially look at the graph, and instead of immediately subjecting the data to statistical treatment, the researcher should get initial impression of patterns that seem to be emerging from the graph. Some of the other questions that the researcher should ask themselves is, do these data make sense following plotting? And can it be explained from a psychological perspective, from a physiological perspective? And that goes back to the research hypothesis, that so-called educated guess that the investigators made before they executed the study. One other type, very important type of exploratory research are methodological studies. And as most studies, if not all studies, use some sort of measurement instrument or tool, it is imperative that those studies use tools that are valid and reliable. But to establish the reliability and validity of such tools, studies have to be done examining those tools themselves. So methodological studies are designed to examine reliability, validity, and or viability of the measurement instruments and or the procedures that will be used in future studies. And when we talk about validity, validity is a concept that examines if an instrument or a procedure that is used in research is actually measuring the intended variable. And so some examples of instruments that must have established validity before they're used in a research setting or even in a clinical setting, especially in a clinical setting, are questionnaires and surveys. And there are many other measurement instruments and procedures that would necessitate the establishment of validity. Reliability refers to the consistency, how consistent a tool is in measuring some aspect of human behavior. And so studies are often carried out to just examine this, whether a questionnaire or a survey is reliable. And these studies usually involve at least two measurements on each research participant, sometimes more, of the same procedure or using the same instrument, with the examination of how close the outcome is following that measurement. So are the results from two or more assessments at different points in time using the same procedures provide similar results? So any tool that's used in research or in a clinical setting not only must provide a valid measure of what is supposed to be tested, but a measure that is consistent and something that we can count on time to time. The third level is referred to as experimental research. And these are studies that are intended to establish cause and effect relationships between a number of variables. The randomized controlled trial, the RCT, has come to be known as the gold standard for experimental designs. And the reason these are considered the gold standard is because numerous factors that can affect the results of a study are controlled in a study such as this. And so these measures of control, by eliminating or minimizing the effects of external variables on the outcome, include the use of control groups, the use of a placebo, random assignment of research participants to different groups, blinding, so that if there is a treatment administered, the researchers administering the actual treatment do not know which treatment is being administered to which research participant. This is the initial study published that established the efficacy of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in December on December 31st, 2020. Now, in this type of study, this was a study that fit the classification of an RCT. In fact, studies that are designed to introduce a new drug for clinical purposes are required by law to have a foundation through an established RCT, a randomized controlled trial. So in addition to a number of controls, this particular study used random assignment. And so 21,720 healthy adults were randomly assigned to a vaccine group, and an almost equal number of healthy adults were assigned to the placebo group. So the placebo group in a study like this received 2 injections of the Pfizer, 2 injections of what of the Pfizer vaccine, but did not have the medicinal ingredients. So the syringe, the bottle had the exact same label as the vaccine group. The only thing missing were the messenger RNA particles, and that way the outcome could be attributed to the medicinal ingredient and not because of the group, and not because of any knowledge of which group received which drug. The quasi-experimental design is same as experimental designs that we saw in Part A, but there's usually less control of the factors involved that could affect the outcome of the study. So studies such as this contains more threats to what's called the internal validity of the study. And so the question here is, why would quasi-experimental designs be used? There are some studies where randomly assigning people to groups might just not be possible depending upon the research question. There are some treatments that just simply cannot be, the participants and the investigators cannot be blind to those treatments. One example is examining the effects of alcohol on reaction time. Research participants would eventually know if they were assigned to the alcohol group, and the investigators would eventually know that as well. At the lowest level here is what's called the pre-experimental design, and these are research designs that have the least control to the threats of internal validity of a study. And one of the key features of the pre-experimental design does not involve random assignments. And so although there's much less control for the threats to the internal validity of a study, pre-experimental designs are useful, particularly when a new concept that has not been investigated before is of interest to begin to study, in which some of the initial levels to establish, for example, drug safety prior to measuring drug effectiveness is often used in a pre-experimental design fashion with smaller sample sizes. So this ends our part 5 of our Unit 1 Introduction to Research Methods and Statistics.